Hello everybody, this is Poppy's Book Club and this is chapter 2 of The Story of a Vet. Last chapter we were introduced to James the vet and the place where he works with his funny boss Siegfried Farnan and Tristram, his brother, and all the funny people that come with their animals for James to make better. So I asked some questions. So the first question was, what is the name of the dog, the big scary dog that none of them wanted to treat? And that great big wolfhound was called Clancy. So well done if you remembered that. Next question was, what is the name of the dog's owner? So, who does Clancy belong to? And that was Mr. Mulligan. So well done there too. And then the third question is, what is the name of the village where James is the vet? And it's called Darrowby in the Dales. So well done if you remembered those and got those right. Okay. This is chapter 2. So again, at the end, I will ask you some questions and you can see how you get on. Okay, chapter 2. This was my second spring in the Dales, but it was like the one before and all the springs after. The kind of spring that a country vet knows. The din of the lambing pens, the bass rumble of the ewes, and the high insistent bawling of the lambs. This, for me, has always heralded the end of winter and the beginning of something new. This and the piercing Yorkshire wind and the hard, bright sunshine flooding the bare hillsides. At the top of the grassy slope, the pens, built of straw bales, formed a long row of square cubicles, each holding a ewe with her lambs, and I could see Rob Benson coming round the far end, carrying 2 feeding buckets. Rob was hard at it. At this time of year he didn't go to bed for about 6 weeks. He would maybe take off his boots and doze by the kitchen fire at night, but he was his own shepherd and never very far from the scene of action. "I've got a couple of cases for you today, Jim." His face, cracked and purpled by the weather, broke into a grin. "It's not really you I need, it's that little lady's hand of yours, and right sharpish too." He led the way to a bigger enclosure holding several sheep. There was a scurry as we went in, but he caught expertly at the fleece of a darting ewe. "This is the first one. You can see we haven't a deal of time." I lifted the woolly tail and gasped. The lamb's head was poking out. "Well, I've seen a few big heads, Rob, but I think this takes the prize." "Aye, the little beggar came early." While he spoke, I was stripping off my jacket, and as I rolled my shirt sleeves high, the wind struck like a knife at my shrinking flesh. I soaped my fingers quickly and began to feel for a space around the lamb's neck. For a moment the little eyes opened and regarded me disconsolately. "He's alive anyway," I said, "but he must feel terrible, and he can't do a thing about it." With the utmost care I inched my way along the curly wool of the neck to the shoulder. Another push forward and I was able to hook a finger round the leg and draw it forward until I could feel the flexure of the knee. A little more twiddling and I had hold of the tiny cloven foot and drew it gently out into the light of day. Turning, I kneeled again and began the same procedure, and as I once more groped forward, a tiny lamb dodged under my arm and began to suck at the ewe's udder. He was clearly enjoying it too, if the little tail twirling inches from my face meant anything. "Where Where did this little bloke come from? I asked, still feeling around. The farmer smiled. Oh, that's Herbert. Poor little youth's mother won't have him at any price. Took a spite at him at birth, though she thinks the world of her other lambs. Do you feed him then? Nay, I was going to put him in with the pet lambs, but I saw he was fending for himself. He pots from one ewe to t'other and gets a quick drink whenever he gets a chance. I've never seen out like it. Only a week old and an independent spirit, eh? That's about the size of it, Jim. I noticed his belly's full every morning, so I reckon his ma must let him have a do during the night. She can't see him in the dark. It must be the look of him she can't stand. I watched the little creature for a moment. To me he seemed as full of knock-kneed charm as any of the others. Sheep were funny things. I soon had the leg out, and once that obstruction was removed, the lamb followed easily. Drying my arms, I watched Herbert. He left my patient when she moved round to lick her lamb, and he was moving speculatively among the other ewes. Some of them warned him off with a shake of the head, but eventually he managed to sneak up on a big, wide-bodied sheep and pushed his head underneath her. Immediately she swung round, and with a fierce upward butt of her hard little skull, she sent the little animal flying high in the air with a whirl of flailing legs. He landed with a thud on his back, and as I hurried towards him, he leapt to his feet and trotted away. Oh, I know, poor little sod. It's rough, but I've got a feeling he wants it this way rather than being in the pet with the pet lambs. Look at him now. Herbert, quite unabashed, was approaching another ewe, and as she bent over her feeding trough, he nipped underneath her, and his tail went into action again. There's no doubt about it, that lamb had guts. Rob, I said, as he caught my second patient, why do you call him Herbert? Well, that's my youngest lad's name, and that lamb's just like him. The way he puts his head down and gets stuck in. He's fearless like. I heard from Rob Benson again a few days later. It was a Sunday afternoon, and his voice was strained, almost panic-stricken. Jim, I've had a dog in amongst me ewes and lambs. There was some folk up here with a car about dinner time, and my neighbour said they had an Alsatian and it was chasing the sheep all over the field. Oh, there's a hell of a mess, I tell you. I'm frightened to look. I'm on my way. I dropped the receiver and hurried out to the car. I had a sinking dread of what would be waiting for me. The in-lamb ewes were in a field by the roadside, and my heart gave a quick thump as I looked over the wall. Arms resting on the rough, loose stones, I gazed with sick dismay across the pasture. This was worse than I'd feared. The long slope of turf was dotted with prostrate sheep. There must have been about 50 of them, motionless, woolly mounds scattered at intervals on the green. Rob was standing just inside the gate. He hardly looked at me, just gestured with his head. Tell me what you think. I daren't go in there. I left him and began to walk among the stricken creatures, rolling them over, lifting their legs, parting the fleece of their necks to examine them. Some were completely unconscious, others comatose. None of them could stand up. But as I worked my way up the field, I felt a growing bewilderment. Finally, I called back to the farmer, Rob, come over here, there's something very strange. Look, I said as the farmer approached hesitantly. It's not a drop of blood, nor a wound anywhere, and yet all the sheep are flat out. I can't understand it. Rob went over and gently raised a lolling head. Aye, you're right. What the hell's done it then? At that moment I couldn't answer him, but a little bell was tinkling far away in the back of my mind. There was something familiar about that ewe the farmer had just handled. She was one of the few able to support herself on her chest, and she was lying there, blank-eyed, oblivious of everything, but that drunken nodding of the head, that watery nasal discharge, I'd seen it before, and I knelt down, and as I put my face close to hers, I heard a faint bubbling, almost a rattling in her breathing. I knew then. "It's calcium deficiency," I cried, and began to gallop down the slope towards the car, Rob trotting alongside me. "But what the hell? They get that after lambing, don't they?" "Yes, usually," I puffed, "but sudden exertion and stress can bring it on." "Well, I never knew that," panted Rob. "How does it happen?" I saved my breath. I injected the first U in the vein, just to check my diagnosis. Calcium works as quickly as that in a sheep, and felt a quiet elation as the unconscious animal began to blink and tremble and then to struggle onto its chest. "We'll inject the others under the skin," I said. "It'll save time." I began to work my way up the field. Rob pulled forward the foreleg of each sheep so that I could insert the needle under the convenient patch of unwooled skin just behind the elbow. And by the time I was halfway up the slope, the ones at the bottom were walking about and getting their heads into the food troughs and hay racks. It was one of the most satisfying experiences of my working life. Not clever, but a magical transfiguration, from despair to hope, from death to life within minutes. I was throwing the empty bottles into the boot when Rob spoke. He was looking wonderingly up at the last of the ewes getting to its feet at the far end of the field. "Well, Jim, I'll tell you, I've never seen aught like that afore. But there's one thing bothers me." He turned to me and his weathered features screwed up in puzzlement. "I can understand how getting chased by a dog could affect some of the ewes, but why should the whole bloody lot go down?" "Rob," I said, "I don't know. And 30 years later, I still wonder. I still don't know why the whole bloody lot went down." I thought Rob had enough to worry about at the time, so I didn't point out to him that other complications could be expected after the Alsatian episode. I wasn't surprised when I had a call from the Benson farm within days. I met him again on the hillside with the same wind whipping over the straw bale pens. The lambs had been arriving in a torrent and the noise was louder than ever. He led me to my patient. "This one has lost her lamb," he said. "This one has lost her lamb," he said. "Well," I said, "how about seeing if she'll take Herbert?" Just at that moment, a familiar figure wandered into view. It was Herbert, the unwanted lamb, easily recognisable as he prowled from sheep to sheep in search of nourishment. Rob looked doubtful. "Well, I don't know. He's a bit old. Nearly a fortnight and they like 'em newly born. But it's worth a try, isn't it?" When we'd finished settling Herbert in, we set Herbert on the grass, and the lamb, resolute little character that he was bored straight in under the sick ewe and began to suck. It seemed he wasn't having much success because he gave the udder a few peremptory thumps with his hard little head. Then his tail began to wiggle. "She's letting him have a drop any road," Rob laughed. Herbert was a type you couldn't ignore, and the big sheep, sick as she was, just had to turn her head for a look at him. She sniffed along his skin in a non-committal way, and then after a few seconds she gave a few quick licks, and the merest beginnings of a deep, familiar chuckle. I began to gather up my gear. "I hope he makes it," I said. "These two need each other." And as I left the pen, Herbert, in his new jacket, was still working away. For the next week, I hardly seemed to have my coat on. The flood of sheep work was at its peak, and I spent hours every day with my arms in and out of buckets of hot water in all corners of the district. in pens, in dark nooks, in farm buildings, or very often in the open fields, because the farmers of those days didn't find anything disturbing in the sight of a vet kneeling in his shirt sleeves for an hour in the rain. I had one more visit to Rob Benson's place, to a ewe with a vitamin deficiency. After I'd given her an injection, the ewe trotted away unperturbed with her family to join the rapidly growing flock whose din was still around us. "Look!" Rob cried. "There's that old ewe with Herbert, over there on right, in the middle of that bunch." They all looked the same to me, but to Rob, like all shepherds, they were as different as people, and he picked out these two effortlessly. They were near to the top of the field as I wanted, and as I wanted to have a closer look at them, we manoeuvred them into a corner. The ewe, fiercely possessive, stamped her foot at us as we approached, and Herbert held close to the flank of his new mother. He was, I noticed, faintly obese in appearance. "You couldn't call him a runt now, Rob," I said. "Look how fat he is." The farmer laughed. "Nay, a tall lass is a bag like a cow, and Herbert's getting the lot. By gor, he's in clover, is that little youth, and I reckon he saved the ew's life. She'd have pegged out all right, but she never looked back once he came along." I looked away over the noisy pens, over the hundreds of sheep moving across the fields. I turned to the farmer. "I'm afraid you've seen a lot of me lately, Rob. I hope this is the last visit." "Ah, well, it could be. We're getting well through now. But it's a hell of a time lambing, isn't it?" "It is that." "Well, I must be off. I'll leave you to it." I turned and made my way down the hillside, my arms raw and chafing in my sleeves, my cheeks whipped by the eternal wind gusting over the grass. At the gate I stopped and gazed back at the wide landscape, ribbed and streaked by the last of the winter's snow, and at the dark grey banks of cloud riding across on the wind, followed by lakes of brightest blue. And in seconds the field and walls and woods burst into vivid life, and I had to close my eyes against the sun's glare. As I stood there, the distant uproar came faintly down to me. Tumultuous harmony from deepest bass to highest treble, demanding, anxious, angry, loving. The sound of the sheep, the sound of spring. So, that's chapter 2. Okay, so, the first question for chapter 2 is a really, really easy one. So, what time of year is it in this chapter? Okay. Second question, what was the name of the little lamb without a mother? Remember, there was a little lamb that was running around because it didn't have its own mother, because its mother had rejected him. And he was running around drinking from all the other ewes. So what was his name? And what's the name of the farmer that we've just met? The farmer that was having to look after all the lambs. Okay, so what was the farmer's name? Okay, so next time we'll do chapter 3 and the answers to the questions from chapter 2. Okay, see you next time. Good luck with the questions. Bye-bye for now.